heat during the Boer War. Their heavy wool uniforms had not been conducive to hot climates such as Africa, and the troops had fought as much against their apparel as they had against the Boers. Thankfully, the army had introduced khaki uniforms shortly after his arrival in South Africa, so he hadn't suffered from the heat for too long. He was quite certain that if the temperature had been any warmer in this ice house, the pair of them would already be paralyzed and in the process of having eggs laid in their bodies. As they backed through the doorway to the tool room, more thoughts of his time in Africa swam through Caleb's head. At first, he couldn't figure out why, but it became clearer as they passed through the tool room. The Boers' guerrilla tactics had been quite effective against the regimented actions of Her Majesty's Fifth. Caleb had seen many army mates succumb to the Boers' short, highly focused, and violent attacks. Sometimes they seemed to appear out of nowhere, and later vanish just as quickly. The Dutch settlers used the rugged, mountainous landscape's steep hills and valleys to their advantage. They would swoop down and ambush the condensed columns of soldiers whose actions were constrained by the narrow geography. And when not pouncing on the British in the mountains, the Boers would stalk their enemy unseen, using the long grass of the veldt for cover. These thoughts of Africa's varied terrain caused Caleb to say, "I think we need to retreat further. I have an idea." He nodded toward the door that led to the catwalk over the pit, keeping his eyes on the spiders at all times. He hoped the spiders might be even slower when out over the ice, since it was much cooler there. And it might be easier to defend their position, since the spiders could only come from one direction and not fan out to surround them, as they were seemingly attempting to do. And so, just as the Boers had taken advantage of the local terrain to launch their attacks, Caleb hoped to use the ice house's layout as a defensive strategy to spare their lives. The doctor pumped his sprayer again at the remaining spiders, and this time they dispersed as he did, avoiding most of the mist, and only a small portion curled up in the throes of death. Seeing the creatures avoiding the spray as they did, Brown remarked, "It appears they're learning." They backed from the tool room and edged onto the catwalk, Caleb slapping at the spiders with the net as Brown sprayed them again and again. Soon, they'd crossed most of the catwalk and were nearing the entrance. The chill of the ice blocks below penetrated Caleb's winter jacket, and he wondered how the spiders liked it. Watching their erratic and somewhat slower movements, he gave a small grin, happy to see they didn't. Mama Spider was now at the back of the pack, herding her offspring forward to attack the men as they retreated. Cornelius continued to pump as they backed up the remaining distance, Caleb swatting what the doctor missed. Unfortunately, many of the baby spiders had now moved off to the edges of the catwalk, attempting to crawl underneath and over top to avoid the deadly mist, and at the same time sneak around behind them. Suddenly, the sprayer gave a sputtering wheeze as it spat out the last of the acidic solution. Shaking his head, the doctor said, "Well, that's it, my boy. Our deterrent is no longer a viable option." "What do you mean, Doc?" "We're out of juice and on our own." "I was afraid that's what you meant." As they continued to back up, Caleb removed the jacket from his shoulders and flung it toward the approaching spiders, saying, "Here you go. Something to warm you up." It flopped over top some of them, and others scattered in panic, falling to the ice below as they did. Moments later, they were in the vestibule, the single hanging lantern bathing the small room's walls with sinuous shadows. Despite the lack of sunlight, it was noticeably warmer here. Giving another small hiss, Mama scuttled into the vestibule just as Caleb reached the front door. He handed the net to the doctor, saying, "You can probably handle this better than me." "Capital idea, my boy." Brown hung the sprayer on his belt and took the long-handled net in both hands. Still several feet away, the large spider paused and trembled momentarily, and Caleb wondered if it was cold. Then, all at once, he saw the tremble for what it was, preparation, and the spider suddenly launched into the air. Fortunately, Brown had been paying attention, and he whisked the net out, deftly catching the creature inside. "Gotcha!" he said triumphantly. "These things can leap now?" Caleb said in amazement. He wondered how things could get any worse, and added, "Well,